Attention, video contains spoilers and might even be PG. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, enjoy the video. Pinocchio. The real version of Pinocchio was the one made by Carlo Collodi called The Adventures of Pinocchio. It's a very long story which involves a talking wood that was then carved into a marionette doll by Geppetto. Very different from the Disney version where Geppetto was the one wishing for Pinocchio to be a real boy. The Disney version was already weird and quite dark for a kid's cartoon, but the real version was weirder and darker that in the story, Pinocchio was more gullible, rude, hard-headed, and mischievous than the Pinocchio we know. So much so, he got Geppetto to mistakenly be put to jail, accidentally killed the talking and advice-giving cricket, lost his own legs for sleeping near a stove, almost got eaten when he became a donkey, tricked by the cat and fox a couple of times, got robbed of all his money and left hanging by a rope a couple of times as well. There's more, to be honest. Collodi tortures Pinocchio a lot in the story, and it's hard not to see his message that bad things will happen to bad children. Anyways, at least the part where his nose elongates when lying and Pinocchio finally learning his lesson by the end of the story is the same. But that itself is quite interesting because the author actually planned to conclude the story with Pinocchio dying a horrible death by hanging. It goes something like this. A tempestuous northerly wind began to blow and roar angrily, and it beat the poor puppet from side to side, making him swing violently, like the clatter of a bell ringing for a wedding. And the swinging gave him atrocious spasms. His breath failed him and he could say no more. He shut his eyes, opened his mouth, stretched his legs, gave a long shudder, and hung stiff and insensible. But because Collodi's young readers were horrified at the ending, his publishers forced him to continue the story. Pied Piper of Hamelin. The story of the Pied Piper is actually a legend of the town of Hamelin in Lower Saxony, Germany, from the Middle Ages. The story we are accustomed to has the ending where the children were given back to the townspeople after they actually paid him what they promised. So, one of the disturbing version of the story goes like this. It starts with a town that was plagued with a rat infestation. The townspeople have done everything from cats to poison, but the rats always thrived on. Then one day, a man, the piper, came to their town meeting and offered his service as a rat catcher with a certain pay. An agreement was achieved and the piper played his pipe, which enchanted the rats into following him and lured all the rats into the Weser River where they all drowned. His part of the bargain was done, but the townspeople regretted their promise that they used all kinds of excuses and refused to pay him. Reaching no conclusion, the piper went away bitter and angry. Then one night, he returned to the town for revenge. He started playing his pipe and this time, all the children over the age of 4 became enchanted and started to follow him heading towards the mountain, where they were never to be seen again. Though the earliest record of the story came from a stained glass window in the church of Hamelin, the window was destroyed in 1660, but several accounts of it survived. There was no real indication of any rat infestation originally, but it was certain that the loss of a few hundred children did happen, and the Pied Piper was either a true magical person or was just a symbolic figure of death. The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid is a fairy tale written by Hans Christian Andersen, a Danish author. The story is about a young mermaid that fell in love with a young prince and liked the thought of having a human soul because she believed it to be eternal even after death, which differs significantly from mermaids that when they die, they turn to sea foam and cease to exist, even if their lifespan is around 300 years. So, the story goes on almost exactly like the Disney version, especially the first part of the story, but when it came to the conditions by the sea witch, the conditions were a bit different than the ones we know. We know that in exchange for human legs, she needs to give up her beautiful voice. But this is when there's more to it. She wasn't given any specific time limit, but she must marry the prince for her to finally turn into a true human. And if he marries someone else, she would die and turn into sea foam. There's also the curse that even if she has legs, she would feel like walking on knives the entire time. By the end, she didn't marry the prince, rather, the prince married a different princess whom he thought was the one that saved him. The Little Mermaid then did turn to foam, but rather than ceasing to exist, she found herself turned into an air spirit that apparently could obtain an immortal soul by doing good deeds to mankind for 300 years. The Little Red Riding Hood. Similar stories of a wolf disguising itself as a close relative for it to eat can be traced back further than the 17th century's version by Charles Perrault and might even have started in East Asia. But Charles Perrault's version is the most oldest published version that everyone nowadays use for adaptations. This one is very simple. The only difference to what we have now is that it ends with Little Red Riding Hood being eaten and no one stopped by to save them. Sleeping Beauty. The one we know involves the true love's kiss that would wake the princess up from the curse when she pricked her finger on the needle of a spindle. That version of the story came from the collection by Brothers Grimm from the tale by Charles Perrault. But the most original concept of the story dates as far back to the 13th century, but rather than a true love's kiss, it involved a woman in a deep coma and a man's lust. And the oldest and closest story published in terms of plot with the version we know was by an Italian poet called Giambattista Basile in the story called Sun, Moon and Talia. Well, at least the first part of the story is quite similar. So the story starts like this. A baby was just born into a lord's household, and this great lord, the father of the newborn, asked wise men and astrologers to predict the future of his little princess, Talia. He shouldn't have done that, as they predicted that Talia will be in danger from a splinter of flax from a spindle. So the lord banished and prohibited any spindle and flax in his household. But a few years later, Talia, out and about, saw a woman spinning flax on a spindle and she got curious. She had never seen a spindle nor flax before, and we know what happened next. Curiosity killed the cat. Well, everyone thought she was dead, but little did they know that Talia was just in deep, deep sleep. The father sadly acknowledged the incident as an unavoidable fate, even after trying so much to prevent the exact thing from happening. So he just couldn't bury his daughter. That's why he puts Talia in one of his country estates, and he sat her on a velvet throne, said his goodbyes, closed the doors and abandoned the house forever, thinking that the house would be her tomb. This is when the story turns into something entirely different. The one that found Talia was a king, and seeing how beautiful Talia was inside an abandoned building that won't wake up no matter what he tried, he raped her. Then Talia got pregnant and she didn't even wake up when she was giving birth to twins. She only woke up when one of the twins sucked on her finger with the splinter and managed to get the splinter out. Imagine her shock waking up into a nightmare where she's suddenly a mother and all alone. Anyways, the king came back to the place and, to his surprise, finds Talia awake, and now he's a father of two twins, which are now named Sun and Moon. He felt responsible and explained everything that he did to Talia. Talia, probably just glad that she doesn't need to be alone anymore, accepted his feelings, but the king said it's not time yet because he still has a wife, so he returned to his kingdom. So one thing led to the other. The queen found out the king impregnated a girl from the king's secretary, so she tried to kill the twins by getting the cook to cook the twins and feed it to the king. Then she even tried to burn Talia to death, but ends up getting caught by the king. The queen told the king that Talia should be burnt and that he already ate his own children a few days ago. Hearing this, the king went into king mode and dismissed everything the queen said and ordered that his wife, secretary, and the cook to be captured and thrown into the fire instead. The cook managed to survive as he quickly pleaded innocent and that the twins were safe. So, with the queen gone, Talia, the king, and the twins lived happily ever after. It's quite sad though for the queen. The king throughout the story never really mentioned anything about Talia nor his kids to his wife. He must have been glad that his wife did all of that he could just kill her then and there as punishment, without explaining himself.